Hi guys, welcome back to the Improvement Season podcast. It's me, Steve Hall, and on the other end, Team Full Rom, Pascal Papa
That's true.
Floor.
Oh, there's a little bit, I was kind of dripping on the shirt, so sorry for Team Full Range of Emotion. On the
Dripping
U,
on the Full Rom.
yeah, the U is kind of dirty right now. You can't see it on video, but it is dirty.
Now, that's a bit of a bane in my life. I like white and like cream colored clothing sometimes, but I'm just like, fuck that shit. Because if I get any speck of dirt on it, I'm like, it needs to go in the wash now. Whereas if you have like black or darker colors, if you get a little bit of dirt on there, it's like, brush it off. It kind of disappears.
When I was playing in a band, we had our tour manager, which was also a very good friend of ours, Christian. He was someone who always spilled stuff. Always. And then it was so funny because at one time we were at a conference in Frankfurt, which was like this big music conference, and he received like a completely like a snow white pullover, and it was completely white. And first thing that he did was like pulling it over, and then he received a coffee, and the thing is just the entire coffee over his pullover. Yeah. It was just like
it's classic. This is I think I had like a white t-shirt, and I was just like on a Boris bike or whatever they're called, the Santander bikes, the ones you can rent in London, and it just flicked dirt up my back, and I was just like, oh, this has just ruined this top now. So I'm just like, fuck any cream white stuff. I'm not made for it. And I guess with kids, it's even worse.
Yeah, it is kind of the same. So it looks freaking amazing, but you can't wear it because it's immediately. So if you wear someone like Justin Bieber, for example, you could always do this because he's just like throwing it away. Yeah. You heard the story about kind of underwear.
Oh no! Does he just wear them once?
Yeah, he wears them. So it's a story. I have no idea. So of course, for obvious reasons, I can't confirm whether this is true or not. But I heard that he's wearing them once and throwing them away. Could be that it's just like a myth, right? But if you wear someone like this, yeah, of course, you could just wear them once and then just like give it to someone else afterwards, right? You wouldn't care.
I'm somewhat embarrassed to admit this. I think, and I hope I'm not alone in this. Hopefully you have the same experience, Pascal, or maybe some of the listeners. I think I have underwear from literally when I was like a teenager, and I still wear it now.
No, I don't. Just because there was this time as a teenager, I was always wearing, and I don't know why. Please tell me why we did it back then. I was always wearing those loose boxer shorts from H&M. Have you worn those? I think I've seen you on one of your posing videos from back like 10 years ago wearing one of those.
They're kind of a bit puffy, like.
Yeah, exactly.
Like loose, really loose. Like exactly. They don't fit snug at all.
And I don't know why you wore those, especially when you are in those adolescence years, because you're a little bit... you don't have the confidence to sit just with boxer shorts in front of someone else. And when there was a girl, you always needed to be careful that your balls didn't really hang out, right? And then at some point, I made the transition to just like very snug boxer shorts, which is just what I'm wearing all the time now. So
I only had a couple of pairs of those really loose ones.
They were awful. They weren't even stretchy. It was just like awful overall. Not comfortable.
I could sleep in them. Was fine, but anything else, like you couldn't play sport in that stuff, like no chance.
Exactly, and why are you then going to buy those kind of things? And that's why I got rid of those. So no, okay. I don't have any one of those any longer. But I don't know how old the oldest ones are in my drawer.
It's like socks. I'll continue. I will continue to wear socks with holes in, but underwear I still wear. I wear underwear with holes in. It's like, I can afford new underwear. Why aren't I doing this? I just hold on to them.
Maybe it's just like a deuce thing because Katie is making me aware of like, Pascal, you got fucking like 6 holes in your socks already. Yeah. Come on, fucking throw them away. And I was just like, they are still fulfilling their purpose. So I will wear them until they are completely destroyed.
No, yeah.
It's also the same with other things as well. Like I once had a backpack that was completely destroyed, but I still were able to close it. So I was just like, I'm going to wear it for as long as possible. And another example is like, I have a pair of gloves And each and every single winter, I'm saying like, I'm going to buy myself a new pair of gloves because they are completely, I look like, honestly, like a homeless guy with those gloves on, but they are still kind of, I don't know, serving a purpose. They keep my fingers warm, but they are completely kind of destroyed on the outside, at least.
It's sometimes you don't know how bad it currently is until you get the new thing and you're like, why didn't I do this sooner?
That's
For
true.
some things it works. For other things, maybe not so much.
Yeah, that's true.
But how are things apart from spilling stuff on your you? Good.
Yeah, I'm a little bit tired here over the past couple of days.
You're a little sick.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the common thing. People know it by now, ever since I got kids. It's just like a recurring thing that happens every 4th week or so. Sorry for that. Yeah, right now, once again, I couldn't avoid it. Yeah, I don't want to go too much into details of why it happened, but yeah, I'm sick now.
It's not the level of sickness you have is like that level, the way you can still do everything you need to. It's just
and I'm also not coughing
level.
the entire time. It's just more like a lethargy that is kind of haunting me throughout the day. It's like I'm sitting here at my desk trying to be productive. I'm just like, writing something, not really that creative and productive. So let's go over to something like this. And then it's just jumping around at work and you don't really feel like 100%. And yeah, you don't really know what to do with yourself, basically.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's kind of that sensation where you feel like you want to be productive, but you can't be.
Yeah.
And it's just frustrating, and it's like it's kind of like you feel like you need a coffee all the time.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
You're just like, I could do with a coffee.
No, absolutely. And this is also something that I felt here over the past days, that normally I'm always having like my 3 espressos, right? And I had 4 over the past days, just because I was constantly like, oh shit, I could actually need one right now just to get through the day. I know it sounds counterintuitive because we know the mechanisms behind it, but at the same time, you want to be present in the moment. So I don't really care whether I have kind of a breakdown. I wouldn't really call it breakdown, but a crash like later in the day. It's fine, right?
Yeah, it's kind of one of those where it's normally you can get away with it for a period of time, at least, like whilst you're a bit sick, and then the days following it might knock you a little bit, but now you're better, so you can kind of handle it. So at least it's used for a purpose. Yeah. Whereas, in a sense, it's periodizing your caffeine intake.
Yeah. And tomorrow I need to actually go to the, what's it called in English? So someone who's taking a look at your ears, at your throat and all the kind of stuff. It has nothing to do with the sickness. I assume it could be that it's kind of correlated. But yesterday evening I came out from bringing the kids to bed. And all of a sudden my right ear was kind of, I don't know, a little bit deaf. Right? I could still hear, but not as properly as the left side. And then I was just like thinking, maybe there's a little bit of dirt. So I tried to rinse it. And then all of a sudden I saw that there's a little bit of blood at the end of it, of the cleanser. I was just like, okay, I definitely need to get it checked. Oh. So tomorrow I just need to get it checked out so that just to make sure that there's nothing going on there. And as already said, like last week, I think it was the last podcast, we are, of course, always talking about the negative things because the positive things are too boring most of the time because we are just like those robots who just like keep on doing the same thing over and over again. And I don't want to leave the impression that there's always something wrong with me and the entire system is shutting down.
Well, hopefully it isn't anything, but blood coming out of areas where you don't expect it to is never a nice thing.
The positive thing is, though, that I'm feeling relatively fine. So if it was something like with your eardrums, then you would also feel very nauseous and all the kind of stuff. And that's not... exactly.
Knocks your balance, that sort of...
Yeah, exactly.
The liquids in there and everything that kind of
and it wasn't like that blood was just like spilling out. Yeah, exactly. It was just like I was getting in there and I was careful with that, right? And then there was
you
just
don't want to stab it in there.
Exactly, a little bit of blood at the tip of the spear.
But I have no idea what that would be called. Like someone who looks at ears and throat and stuff. I don't think I've ever come across what that's named.
In Germany, it's It's actually very, very idiotic to some extent. It's kind of Hals, Nasen, Ohrenarzt. It is just like very much throat, nose, ear doctor. So
throat nose. Maybe it's called the same. It literally might be like throat, nose, ear doctor here as well. But otherwise, passing these and hopefully they're all okay. Things are still running smooth with the mass. Kind of just is what it is, and training.
Yeah. I received my belt. Last week, and I used it for the first time. What is it now? No. This is the old one actually that I've used.
Okay,
which had a little bit of what it is that you can see. Exactly, the taper here. This is more like a relatively classical form of like a weightlifting belt.
Yes,
and this is what I had prior to that, in hopes that it also then solves the issue about the compression of the rib cage. It didn't really do its job because it's still very, very stiff, as you can see. And then the other belt arrived, and I've tried it on something like Smith machine squats here 2 days ago. And tomorrow I have my pull session with then SLELs as well. And this is the one where I'm very much looking forward to it. It is also a little bit stiffer, of course. It's not just like a piece of cloth that you're just like wrapping around. Still, a little bit of stiffness adds to the frame and around your midsection, but it feels good. So I'm very much excited and looking forward to actually then doing some heavier pulls off the floor tomorrow.
What brand did you go for?
It's just Strength Shop.
Okay. Yeah, just their standard Velcro.
Yeah, because they are doing great products overall for fairly cheap price, and most of their products. And also back then, like ages ago, I think it must have been in 2014, I actually had a lot of home gym equipment, so basically just a barbell, but a lot of plates as well. And everything I ordered from Strength Shop back then, and it was actually fairly cheap as well.
Yeah, they've been doing a great job for a while now, actually.
Yeah.
Cool. And actually, I've got a question about Smith machine squats, because I had to rotate out pendulum squats on like the fly, basically, because it was irritating my knee. It did irritate my knee during the deload as well. And I was like, why does it irritate my knee now? Apparently, the Watson pendulum squat that I use is particularly known for causing like some knee upset because of the way it's just different in that it doesn't have a counterweight, and you're in more of a kind of vertical position when you're coming, so it's a bit more harsh onto the knees apparently. So even pausing them was causing me problem, and I literally, any weight, I just couldn't find like an angle of feet or any position where it just was like a sensation of when I got to a point, it was just discomfort and pain, and I was like, I'm not pushing through. Old me a few years ago probably would have pushed through and caused myself a proper injury.
Steve, that's very interesting, because one of my athletes this week has checked in with me and said like, man, the pendulum squats that we're doing right now give me a little bit of pain on the knee as well. And I'm always someone who says like, okay, let me see a form video first, because it could always be that we can optimize things. Something that we've talked about in the past, especially with knee flexion movement. Many people's issue isn't really the movement itself, but more so the momentum that they are using coming into the hole and then bouncing out of it, which causes a lot of knee issues with a lot of people, especially on something like hack squats, for example, when you're not going into the hole, controlled, pausing there and then coming up again. And it was fine on his end. And I said like, okay, I can't really say or pinpoint that there's any kind of flaw in your technique. And then this is the moment to actually then change things up. And it's interesting to hear that you are going through kind of knee issues on pendulum squats as well.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd be interested to know if any of the listeners have felt similar, if on maybe they've done a Watson pendulum before, like I've got like the oldest one is available to me. So then I just moved to Smith squats, which is what you talked about, completely pain-free. Once I got into it and grooved, and like my knee forgot that it was hurting from the other movement, and man, it felt great. Like Smith squats for me, I don't know if you've used them in different Smith machines, but I've only ever used them in really a couple. One was like, I don't know what brand it was, Techno Gym, I think it was. And then the other one is Matrix. That's what's available in most kind of commercial gyms. I never really felt them great. Like I used them because I was like, they should be a decent movement, but they never really got my quads like that stimulus we talk about in terms of like pump, disruption, that sort of thing. Whereas these, my quads were like, I was sore leading into my next quad session, which very rarely happens.
And in this session itself,
Felt great, yeah. Felt just tremendous. The only thing I can say that's different about this Smith machine, it's not angled or anything, it's straight up and down, which the others were. There's like no friction on it. So it's literally like weightless. So rather than like the Matrix one, it was always a bit janky on one side and just wasn't completely smooth. And the Technogym one had like quite a bit of friction. Whereas this one, like you had to control the eccentric. Whereas if there's friction, the concentric makes it tougher, but on the eccentric, it kind of takes out all of that for you. So I can only think that's the difference.
A couple of thoughts here. Have you ever seen Matt Ogres when he's oiling? The
WD-40 type of... Yeah.
Do you think it's appropriate to do something like this, or would you rather than approach the gym staff and letting them know that it could be optimized?
I think it's something that I would think about doing on the fly. Like on the slide, sorry, not fly. I actually saw someone the other day in Yorkies go to the desk and come back with WD-40. So I think it's something in like a private gym that would be way more open to it. In like a commercial gym, I think they'd be a bit like, I don't know. There's always just more red tape and annoying things involved where you just can't do stuff. But in like private gyms,
because it's not your equipment, right?
Yeah.
And if you go to do kind of yourself about it with WD-40, if you don't know what it is, it's actually removing also oils and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. And that's why when it comes to also, I just know it from working on motorbikes, it's something that you use very carefully. It's not that you're just like spraying everything in with it, because it's kind of, I don't know the exact definition in English, but it's kind of creeping spray. So it creeps into different kind of areas and also small kind of cracks and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
And that's why when you're then going about it at the gym, if you want to oil it, then use proper like kind of machinery oil instead of kind of WD-40, because it could be that you're actually then damaging the machine because you get rid of the oil that is then lubricating the entire thing. And at the same time, it's not your property, So I rather than let them know, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there is definitely something to it. You want to have it run smoothly and all that kind of stuff,
I think I can see why someone might do it on the fly. Sly. I keep saying fly. Do it on the sly but you're definitely right. The best thing to do is tell them about it, and then hopefully they fix it. And then I would be like, if they don't do anything about it, I'd consider maybe trying to do something just to make that better.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I used, maybe it was I think it was WD-40. All I knew is I used it for my bike on the chain to like make it smooth again and lubricated.
That's the thing that many people do, and you are basically destroying the chain with it.
Oh, I did not know that at all.
It's creeping into then the small bits and pieces of the chain, and inside there is also then of course oil and fat, so grease, that keeps it kind of lubricated and also clean from other dirt. And you're basically making or doing more harm than good with something like this.
Oh, because I used it on when I got my Mirror Fit lat pull down and I was training from home. I used it on that as well, as advised from like reviews, because people are like, you have to lubricate it, or it should come with lubricant, because it doesn't come with any, and it's like it doesn't work basically without any lube on there. So I don't know. It worked for that short-term purpose, and it was my own equipment. But good advice for maybe a gym owner or something can comment and tell us what maybe people should do.
So going back to the Smith machine squats, right now the beauty is in my gym we have like two different ones. They are from the same brand of Matrix, and there's one that is just like straight up and down, and then there's one that is angled. I always like to use and they are side by side. So I always like to use the angled one because it more so mimics kind of like a hack squat. The unfortunate thing about this is you really have to position yourself properly, because otherwise it can feel very off just by a couple of centimeters if you're just too far ahead with your feet or too far back. But it's the same with the Smith machine squats as well, and hacks kind of as well. But I have the feeling that you really need to be careful, because otherwise you're just like, it just feels off and not good overall.
No. Yeah, I have never had access to one with a slight slant, but I've always wanted to because I think it makes sense for squatting patterns, for pressing patterns to push away from the body. Squatting patterns, you can kind of sit into the quads more, whereas the vertical ones, obviously, that's not like, it's just not maybe the ideal path of motion, but it felt great all the same. But
I just know that for me personally, whenever I do like free weighted squats, the bar path isn't like completely straight for me. It's kind of coming forward just slightly, and that's why having that angled approach is mimicking more so my natural kind of bar pattern rather than just straight up and down.
Do you not see the progress you would like? Are you sick of writing your own programs? Or perhaps you need some accountability in order to stick with a plan? Then it's time to start working with us. We at Revive Stronger offer a truly personalized coaching service. You'll get more than just an email with some macros or random cookie cutter program. With Revive Stronger, you will be the center of our attention. You will receive your own fully individualized training protocol alongside a customized nutritional strategy. We created the coaching around your needs, wants, personal preferences, and your own unique lifestyle. Every single week, we delve into your program in order to make appropriate adjustments so that we get the most out of your time and the best possible outcome. We help both female and male athletes to seriously change their body composition by adding more muscle mass and decreasing fat tissue. No matter if you're a competitive bodybuilder or just want to look better, if you need help with your progress and taking your physique to the next level, our coaching is for you. It's time to make a change. Sign up today and let's revive stronger.
Yeah, straight up and down. It's just not, I mean, that's like the efficient route for powerlifting, right? But when you're doing like a full depth, like hypertrophy style, kind of trying to target the quads, quite often you'll sink into it and you'll sink into the quads and it will travel a little bit forward. So that makes sense. But I was glad to have at least rotate out the pendulum and not be kind of just like dogmatic that I need to do this because I've only just rotated it in and
Steve,
I found something that felt great.
Yeah, what I would like to know from you is, because you have now had the discussion with Jacob Templer, that podcast episode will come out, and he talked a little bit about low back pain and locking out the knees on the leg press and all that kind of stuff. And I was thinking, there was, for a longer period of time, there was the recommendation against kind of, or being careful on leg presses with a lower back rounding as well. And I've even heard from people that they've injured themselves on something like a leg press. But just based on the weight distribution, I have a hard time imagining why the lower back may then get injured on a movement like this, even with then something like a butt wing, because it's kind of very similar to a squatting pattern. And in the squat, though, it's a axial compression. So axial loading, whereas on a leg press, that's not necessarily the case. So I wonder, what's your stance on it? Is it all right for you to let the lower back round? Because that's what I do, because it feels more natural to me. But on the back of my mind, or at the back of my mind, it's always like, I remember that there was a time where so many people said, like, don't ever let your low back round on something like a leg press. And I've never really heard anyone specifically address or talk about this.
I think the jury, at least from my understanding, is still out on that. I think there's people still on opposing sides with it. I don't think there's like a clear black and white answer. I like people's take on it, like Jacob, because he is actually a physio and he really understands kind of pain and kind of how plastic the body can be and how adaptive it can be and what maybe is something for concern. And the big takeaway I took from him was like, if it feels good to you and doesn't feel injurious at all, it's probably not. And I know there are people on the side of the fence who would say, even if it doesn't feel bad, over time, if you're putting yourself in a position that for whatever reason they claim to be injurious, it's gonna crop up at some point. So it's kind of like on like for machine presses, a lot of people are putting in like yoga blocks, or they're putting in like clips to like start out in a slightly like position, then they press and then they drop out and they go into their motion. I've never found it a problem to just sit in a big stretch and start. And they're like, oh, but you're at that big stretch with a lot of load. And I'm like, yeah, but if I'm selecting appropriate load, it's a comfortable range of motion for me. And I'm not doing any like weird janky movements here. I've never had any problems with that personally. I could definitely see if you jumped in with too heavy a load and you're in this really stretched kind of position where you could injure yourself. Yeah. But for me, it's never been a problem. So I think it's similar with the leg press. Like if you're experiencing it and it's feeling good to you, and you have no reason to believe, like we don't have concrete evidence to say the lower back rounding is absolutely something you should avoid, then I have a hard time after speaking to Jacob to saying that's definitely wrong. So I think potentially when your lower back does round, you could lose, I think, and I don't know the complete explanation, but a bit of force production somehow. I remember that being said, where if you kind of round too much, there could be some force production reduced through the quads, but I can't remember the exact explanation. So I don't know if that was a satisfying answer.
Yeah, I don't know. Because if I don't do it with the low back, or with the rounding, most of the, and we've talked about it extensively, most of the leg presses out there are just like awful.
Yeah.
Right. From the way that they are built. So I have to basically round my lower back in order to get a proper range of motion in. Otherwise, it feels very much like half range of motion.
Yeah.
So I have to do it in order to then stimulate the quads. So basically, it kind of contradicts the things that you just said there in regards to some people claiming that it's not stimulating the quads to a significant extent.
I think that's also part of it, is like, if in an ideal world, maybe you get that combination of full range of motion without the lower back rounding. But if you can't, then full range of motion with the lower back rounding is more stimulus. Something I do is using the yoga block, and I've been playing around with this. I like place them under my butt, behind my lower back, and I kind of have found, for me, the sweet spot is just behind the lower back. And that tends to prevent as much rounding as I would typically get, and I still get the same amount of range of motion. So some people might find if they put something just below their like lower back, it kind of, they don't round as much because it's just like providing a support for the lower back that you wouldn't have had otherwise. But that's the only solution I found for it. But yeah, I'm the same with you. If I was to use it with no like any movement in that lower back and no hip, some people don't even like the hips to move in that position, I wouldn't get any sort of good quad stimulus.
Yeah.
It would just be such a half like range of motion, and I don't think I'd get much from that at all.
Man, just build some proper leg presses, please.
yeah.
Fucking hell, then we wouldn't really have those discussions anymore.
I think the leg press is one of the worst, like the machine that I find most often is that poorly built for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've used a lot of leg presses, and the vast majority I can't use it well.
Yeah.
And the current one I'm using, like I said, I have to use yoga blocks behind, and then it takes me a while. It's like you said, with the foot position, you have to get it so right. For me, with the leg press, it takes me a while to find every time. Like, I know roughly where they need to be, but if I'm just off, I'll have a little bit of heel rise more than I want. It'll feel a bit awkward somewhere. It's just, it's kind of frustrating. But once I find the position, it feels just fantastic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's the same for me whenever I'm sitting in there. I'm just like, last time it felt so much better than this time. So what has changed? And often it's just like those small 1 to 2 centimeters of a foot positioning actually makes the difference. It's crazy.
And actually, something you've just reminded me of as well with Jacob is we kind of talked about, and I know you already were aware of this, we were aware of this as well, where people visually, maybe the lower back's not rounding, but it probably is rounding at points. Like, it might look neutral, but it's probably rounding somewhat. So it's like, well, like, you're advising people to not round maybe in the leg press and take it as low as they can whilst not rounding, but it is rounding. You just can't see it.
And then you can always ask the question of like, what was the real reason as to why it got injured? Was it really then the leg press, or were they just prone for then a lower back injury, and it may have then accelerated it, or it would have happened independent of then the exercise itself? Because there are plenty of people who go through something like this, through heavy lifts, for example, with a lower rounded back and never experience any kind of low back issues. Whereas then there are people probably who are very careful and yet always injure themselves. Yeah. It's the same when it comes to other athletes as well. What was it again? There was just something about that I've read just recently, kind of soccer players, I think it was, with with slight scoliosis or something like this. Oh no, it was also something I can't really recall. Anyway, there are also other athletes. There's also, for example, a thing about NFL players with then herniated discs, where there is a high percentage of NFL players who have a herniated disc, but never really experience any kind of negative symptoms. Right? And then there are, of course, people who experience those symptoms. And that's why, when it comes especially to pain science, it's still such an undiscovered field, and there are so many questions left unanswered yet, and so many things that we simply don't know yet. And it's very foolish to draw too many conclusions at this current time.
And I think that's why Jacob's stance is generally like, if it's feeling good, it's probably not bad. And if it's feeling bad, it's probably bad. And really take an individual approach.
Yeah. But it's so funny because it very much boils down to our mentality around training and nutrition as well. So many things, even if you're not the best at gauging things from feeling things out, for example, people are also not stupid. So if the body is giving you some signals, it could also be that you can listen to your body at times. Now, it is hard to decipher when you should listen to the body and when you shouldn't. So, for example, when you are an unexperienced dieter, you've never really experienced hunger in your life, and then you go into your first cutting phase, then this will be a very foreign feeling and sensation for you. And then you're just like, holy shit, I'm dying. This is awful, right? And you've actually only been cutting for like 2 weeks, and you've never really experienced what true hunger then really feels like. So, right, in a situation like this, the body isn't telling you like, okay, now you have to eat more again. To some extent it does, right, because of physiological adaptations, but it's not that. It's a detrimental thing to just keep or stay in a caloric deficit. Whereas when you're then injured or so, often the body is very good at telling you what it is that you can or cannot do.
Apologize, I was just scrolling to find a post
where
I saw someone talking about this lower back grounding, and Jacob actually commented on it, and his first thing was, your backgrounds, whether you see it or not, there are several studies that suggest this, it's not visible. And then there's like a huge thread underneath it. So yeah, it's like you said, like you have to take an individual into consideration, but also it's not like if it feels bad, it doesn't mean it's inherently bad. You could be doing it under terrible conditions, like, oh my gosh, I feel so hungry and terrible. Well, if your diet looks like Pop-Tarts and like whey protein, then no wonder you're hungry, duh. But if you're doing everything you should be, your sleep's great, you're kind of choosing high volume foods, wholesome foods, and you're starving, maybe something needs to be looked at there as well. So
no, absolutely,
I think that's well said. But these things, it's one of them. I just like the idea of, I like simplifying these things, which is why I think we quite like the in-session kind of stimulus in terms of pump and disruption, and like sensation in terms of how does it feel to you, because that gives us quite easy perception and feedback that we can use it on an individual basis to assess things, versus trying to like dive into all these studies talking about lower back grounding and everything. If you can boil it down to kind of causing pain or discomfort or not, that simplifies that. And simplification isn't always better, but in many times it can be, especially if some smart people have looked into it heavily and concluded that's like the starting place at least to go to. That helps us as coaches and trainees do these things.
No, absolutely. That's also one of the reasons why I'm not the biggest proponent of kind of set progression throughout a mesocycle. That is kind of, seems maybe arbitrary. Often it isn't if you have like a coach who knows what he's doing. But at the same time, I don't really like to be overly aggressive with that, because it just adds another variable that just makes the entirety a little bit of a mush, because adding one more set is so much more than just adding another repetition, because it adds, let's just say you're doing like 10 repetitions on a set, right? If you were to add one more rep, it's one more rep. If you were to add one more set, then you're all of a sudden doing 10 more repetitions. If you then do this on a weekly basis, then of course you probably need to take a deload very early and so on. And at the same time, it becomes way more complicated to then really gauge how things are going and all that kind of stuff. And I am also under the opinion that in the end, you will probably probably induce the same, if not maybe the better hypertrophic outcome if you focus on then the quality, really focusing on bringing the intensity, and then pushing the mesocycle for as long as you need through the deload instead of chasing the deload. And often I have the feeling that when you're just ramping up the volume, you're chasing the deload, because at some point time will become the limiting factor and fatigue will become the limiting factor. Why not just switch it around and be like, I take the deload whenever I need to, because I have been pushing on for so long, instead of the other way around, you know?
Yeah, I think it's that understanding that like you're not pushing for MRV or like that point where you have to deload. You're not pushing to have to deload. You are training in a way that causes fatigue, causes overload and stimulus. And eventually, when you do that for long enough, you will have to deload.
Yeah.
But you certainly shouldn't, like you said, it's like chasing soreness. It's like you don't want to chase soreness, but it can be an indicator that you're doing things possibly correctly or wrongly.
Yeah.
And it's just understanding those variables. And I think with a rudimentary understanding of them, it can be a case of, oh, okay, so I'm training hard enough and now more volume is better. And then they just push more and more and more. It's like, but do you need more? Is there a good reason for it? And that's why I still use set progression, but compared to how I did it a couple of years ago, or maybe 3 years ago, it's like much, much different. And I do find, I reckon if you look at the average volumes of what I'm doing and what my clients are doing, it's lower than it used to be, because I'm so much more conservative about it. Isn't just a case of, oh, I can do more, so let's do more. No. It needs to come from more of a rationale than just that.
I would try to visualize things now. This is just my thoughts and ideas. And maybe it's better than to actually visualize it with kind of drawing things out. But let's just say, if we're not just looking at one mesocycle, but over the time span of maybe an entire macro cycle, I think that the results would probably still be the same in terms of then the workload. And perhaps I would assume the outcome would perhaps even be better. Because if you were to, let's say, have a set progression in a mesocycle, and that is just like each and every single week you're adding some sets, and you have to then take the deload after 4 weeks. So you have a 5-to-1 paradigm, 4 weeks of accumulation followed by 1 week of deload. If you then sum it up, right, you have a certain amount of deloads. In a case like this, let's just say the entire macro cycle is like 6 months long, then you end up with 5 to 6 deloads. Right? If you, though, were to not do the set progression and you take the deloads when needed because you're pushing, and then you have mesocycles where you feel great and you can push for 5 or 6 weeks or so, then you may only end up with then 3 to 4 deloads. So the entire workload of productive sessions and then also the sets that you've been doing is maybe still the same, but spread over a longer time frame with just less frequent deloads and so. And that with less intra-session fatigue that you're then accumulating and all that kind of stuff. So in my opinion, it's very, very hard to find a good justification, in my opinion, to have a very aggressive approach with set progression. And if so, then it should be very, very conservative of like, okay, hey, each and every single time I'm doing this, even when I went through an entire mesocycle, I could feel that I could do like a little bit more for this body part. Then yeah, add something, right? But and for other people who are just like this, at the beginning of a mesocycle, they still receive a good pump, good metabolic disruption, but they could feel that they can do more. So why would you start with more? Doesn't really make sense, right? And also from a psychological perspective, they couldn't really do like 5 sets for a specific exercise throughout the entire meso. Then yeah, maybe it is a good idea to then progress via the sets, because you could do more, but you can't maintain this over the entire mesocycle, and you don't have to, right? Then totally fine. But other than that, I think extending mesocycles, to me at least, makes more sense, especially considering my example with possibly the workload over a longer time frame being the same because you're taking less deloads. And I'm not saying, because everyone knows that, especially after listening to our last episode, that I'm a proponent of deloads, but I am not a proponent of like taking them after each and every single 4 weeks or so. And if you then are chasing that because you're always adding sets, I think it's the wrong approach.
Yeah, I think it's Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I think you can. I think it's an almost not an answered question, and I don't know if it will ever be answered in terms of like the different paradigms there. And I was just thinking, could you relate it to like losing at a slightly faster rate of loss, but having to take a diet break sooner versus losing a bit slower and taking a diet break later? Yeah, and therefore you get to the end result the same, but one might suit one person better than the other or something. I don't know if it works the same way as that. In a nice way it would, and when we do look at volume equated studies, it tends to pan out that they're pretty much the same.
Would you though, if you think about volume equated studies, right? We also know that on a per session basis, there may probably be an set MRV. So everything after that is less and less productive, in kind of nearly an exponential fashion, right? So each and every single set that you're doing is giving you less of a stimulus in return. So if you were to spread it out over a longer time frame, so just due to frequency, wouldn't it make sense that we are then going to see better results?
I don't know. I guess that's what the level of adaptations are taking place. And that's why I like actually thinking about this kind of in-session stimulus with the pump and disruption, because I'm like, week 1, do enough so you have some, and then if you're getting some and like it's comparable and it's not going down, if anything it's going up because you're probably taking stuff closer to failure week to week, then you don't need to add sets on top of that, because that, like you said, it's a lot of additional stimulus. But if you're adapting, I don't know, at some crazy pace and you're just finding like, meh, I'm not getting anything from this, I'm doing 2-3 sets, I'm feeling well recovered, then I'm like, okay, in that situation, you can probably add something there, you're going to get a bit more from that. But in many cases, for me, for example, with like quad and hamstring training, particularly at the moment, I can't find a reason to add anything from week 1 to the end. Like, I need the amount that I need in week 1, but past that, every week I just get more and more that kind of in-session stimulus where I'm getting great amounts of pumps, disruption, performance is good. I can't think of a logical reason why, apart from my kind of monkey brain that's like, add more sets, you want bigger quads, to add any. Whereas maybe for something like my back, I do find I adapt a little bit more quickly to some of that training, and adding a set isn't such a big toll on my body versus like adding a set to like my legs. So I find, and that's where just taking the individual into account, auto-regulating these variables, understanding them properly comes in. So for some of my muscle groups, they seem to just get a great stimulus. And I guess that window that people might talk about in terms of MEV to MRV is like, they're so close, it's just like static, and I can just make that move through just increasing reps or load. Yeah. Whereas for other ones, there is that level of adaptation where if I don't add something to, normally it is my back training where I just find that's the where I tend to add sets more often. Or if I don't, it's just like, just my back is just not feeling like it's doing what it should. But it's tricky as well. This is something I'd be interested to hear your opinion on, Pascal. With pump and disruption is something that I use with clients to kind of give me kind of an understanding of have they got it, where is it, and I talk them through it. But something I've come to realize in the last years, and something I've been talking to clients more about, is the fact that it might feel, and we've talked about it, in fact, that it might feel different in different muscle groups, and that there isn't like a kind of set pump and disruption as in you should feel this in that muscle group to feel high. Because my quads feeling really high, I'll never get that sensation in my back or in my hamstrings or in my calves, not to the same degree. So it's kind of like they're all on their own separate scale where what is high maybe where I'm feeling like, damn, I've had a really good back workout. If I felt that same level in my chest, it would maybe be like medium. Whereas like I'm never going to get the same sort of like huge pump and like maybe even soreness that I might exhibit in my chest, in my back. It's just for whatever reason, physiologically, I'm never going to feel that. I don't know if you've seen that as well, where you almost have to rate each muscle on its own separate kind of scale.
Losing weight fast while maintaining muscle mass. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? It isn't though. It's reality and we know how to do it. And we will help you achieve this. The Minicut Movement is an 8-week fat loss program to make you lose a huge chunk of fat while maintaining muscle mass at the same time. We will support you from the beginning to the end so that you see the results you would like to and come out of it much stronger. You'll receive a fully automated spreadsheet that is based on your nutritional needs. You can choose between 6 different male and female training templates. Over 30 videos will guide you through each and every single step of the the mini cuts so that you're getting the most out of your journey and that you always know what to do. But the best thing is that you can start whenever you want. The mini cut movement is open 24/7. So if you want to learn more or you're ready to sign up, hit the link in the description below. So let's revive stronger together.
Yeah, and that's why I like to use saunas and pumps as a good indicator and gauge in the first 1 to 2 weeks. And after that, not so much. And then it's more just a matter of experience, to be honest, because I know that if people also, and that brings me back to what I just said about kind of set progression as well. If we are finding ourselves in a let's just say the general recommendation of like 10 to 20 sets. We know that it's not always the case, especially for lower body movements. Many people only often need a range of like 6 to 12, maybe for quads and hamstrings. Right, so the general recommendation should rather than look something like maybe 5 to 20 or so, rather than 10 to 20 in my opinion. But let's just say 10 to 20, right? If we know that generally speaking, that yields great results with the vast majority of people, I just like to push them in a mesocycle for as long as necessary. And eventually people will need that deload. If you're then also bringing the relative intensity down and all that kind of stuff. And I don't necessarily need then the pump or the saunas to tell me whether it feels productive or not, because they can easily tell me like, hey, I felt exhausted. And when I'm then, I don't know, whenever you did like a chest movement or chest exercise or chest session in general, and you're leaving the gym and you're doing, I don't know, some kind of movement, right? Maybe an abduction movement or anything alike, and you can feel, oh, my chest is a little bit tired, right? Perfect. That's probably all you need to know, instead of like being completely annihilated and not being able to walk for like days on end. I think that is just taking it too far. And if that's not the case, if you're just like coming out of the session and you feel like, man, I could do the same session another time and that wouldn't be a problem, the chances are you could probably do more. And I think that this is way more important just to, and this is also then going back to what we said about kind of trying to learn to listen to your body of like, how do you feel after a workout? Like in that body part, not necessarily systemically speaking, but more so in that body part. Do you feel like you've exhausted that and gave a good stimulus to that? And if that's a clear yes, then I think it becomes less so important whether you did 6 sets for it or 8 sets for it. I think the difference there will be a little bit negligible, maybe.
I completely agree. I think that's the case where, and I'm sure you've done this, I think you have done this in sessions, and I'm sure in the past I wouldn't have done this, but now if I had programmed in my mesocycle, whatever, a certain number of sets, but I felt like I was like, I have got what I needed from this session in this muscle group. I'm not doing more because I know that'll lead to too much. And the great example is me switching to the Smith machine squats, where I just let my ego get ahead of me, where I was like, oh, I just want to do a bit more. It's feeling so good. Whereas actually it was giving me more stimulus through the quads than the pendulum squat was. And I should have just capped it and I wouldn't have been sore then, probably leading into my next session. And now I've learned that and I'm like, right, I've got what I needed out of this. So I've definitely had it with clients where they're like, Steve, if I have programmed 4 sets, but I've done 3 and I'm like, I feel like I've got what I needed. Should I do the 4th? No, don't do the 4th. Unless maybe it's like pre-deload and you have to deload for whatever reason. Then maybe that's one instance you might. But in most instances, no. Like you got what you needed from the session. And even in that instance, you could argue, why bother?
Exactly. And that's the thing. Of course, you never really want to just like do the bare minimum, in my opinion. That is barely ever a good idea unless you have a specific or good reason for it. So let's just say you are so busy at the moment that you need to focus on other things, but you don't at the same time want to neglect training. Then of course, you can boil it down for a short period of time to the bare minimum to induce a hypertrophic stimulus. But if you're interested in making some progress, muscularly speaking, but also from a strength perspective, I don't think that you always need to push to the highest amount all the time of like, what is my body capable of recovering from? Because I could see that over a long enough time frame, the differences are barely visible to the naked eye.
Yeah, it's kind of like, would I get that extra little percentage by doing this additional bit of work?
Exactly.
And I think I definitely fall in that camp, but I have tempered that much more in the past years, where I'm like, but that you might not get an extra 1%, and you might, and you're certainly inducing some fatigue there as well.
Yeah.
So it isn't just a win. Like it could be it's not just a win or nothing. It's like, it could be a win, it could be a nothing, it could be just a loss. And so you have to be really careful in that situation.
That is the thing, and that's also something that you and I both discussed in regards to supplements, right? When someone is making the argument like, but it could give me those additional 1 to 2%, and then why wouldn't I do it?
Yeah.
Because you have no way of quantifying or measure that, whether it's truly giving you 1 to 2% in return. And maybe because of that, because you can't measure it, it could also go the other way around as well. Have you ever considered this? And often people don't really take this into consideration. And if we know, just based on general recommendations and a huge sample size of people that where things worked, then you can be rest assured that if you do this, then you will probably see great results already. And then you can maybe fine-tune things, but don't always expect that the things or the decisions that you're making are going to yield better results. And that's all right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like Jake Reed spoke about on the podcast in terms of like anabolic and catabolic. People are always thinking about the anabolic things, but they're thinking about all the things that are catabolic in their life that they could also not do and like keep away from. And I think one of those, well, sleep is obviously can be both, but that's something we've learned recently. Is like in the past, I think I very much had the attitude of not even worrying about sleep and pushing through, maybe to, I don't know, wake up for early morning sessions or whatever it is and not do it later in the day, or cardio. It's like, well, actually, that's really like, that's a big thing that you're leaving on the table, and like you're harming yourself there. And yeah, as you mature as a lifter and we learn about these things, you understand these things better as well. So
it's not just maturing as a lifter, it's maturing as a person in general, because there are probably a lot of things in your life where that is applying as well, where it's like, it's not about adding things, it's maybe about redistribution of your resources. So instead of always like, you have 10 things that you're doing and adding another thing to optimize things, then you have 11 things. And then adding another thing that optimizes the thing that you've wanted to use to optimize things, right? You're just adding things instead of then taking a look at what it is that you have in front of you and then prioritize things, maybe also throw things out that are not as important, right? And then boil it down to the most fundamental things instead of always kind of, now I use yohimbine to relax, even though that ashwagandha to relax, when in reality it's just because you are prioritizing staying awake for 1 hour longer because you want to watch that Netflix show, and then you try to compensate that with ashwagandha to calm down, and then you're supplementing with melatonin because you feel not rested the next morning and stuff like that. Where then the solution isn't like adding more things to help with your lifestyle. It is then to make a change of like maybe not making the decision in the first place of them watching that 1 hour additional hour. And then you don't need to stress about those 3 things in general, right?
Yeah, it's like trying to put a Band-Aid on a cut. It's just like trying to avoid getting cut in the first place.
Yeah.
But I think that's a great example. And actually something I've recently done, I imagine some of the listeners will be able to appreciate this. It just shows, again, my kind of maturity with some of my training is I think, right, more is better. Oh, I should be training my traps. I should be training my forearms. You know, I had trained those in the past. I haven't been training those for the last, like this entire off season, because I was just like, let's consolidate. Like my leg days are literally just legs, because I'm like, they are so important to me. I don't want any kind of fluff work in there that is unnecessary. I don't need to worry about my forearm growth, really. I have fine traps. Let's put arms on the back burner, because then I get to really make sure this work that gets done is the best it can possibly be to maximize the stimulus there. So some people might look at that and like, oh, you're taking things out, you're going to get less results. But I'm like, no, I'm taking those out so I can get more results from the things I am doing, because I think they could be even better. I think people would be surprised when they do bring things down. And I think we have seen this with our clients, like how good their quality can be of work. And obviously there's a sweet spot where you're not doing so little that like I'm just training legs and nothing else. But like that's too like, oh, I want my quads to grow, so I'll just train quads and nothing else. Sure, like your quads will grow, but what are you sacrificing? But there's a balance here where I'm removing some stuff and making sure to prioritize some other stuff even more.
Yeah. It's like a chef in the kitchen, you know? You have so many things that you can use as ingredients, but that doesn't mean that you should use all of them to make it taste great, because chances are, if you're just like throwing in salt, pepper, and all of the other herbs, then it won't really taste great, right? So you want to kind of see what you just need to actually make it then taste better. And it could be something that is super simplistic overall, with like, we always talk about a margherita pizza that is Neapolitan, but this is the thing, right? If you can make a great pizza with only 3 ingredients, basically, or it's a little bit more than this, but it's kind of dough, right? What is it? It's water, it's flour, it's salt, right? There's not more to it. And then
maybe a little oil.
Maybe a little bit oil. So this is 4 ingredients, and then you have the tomato sauce and a little bit of cheese, right? If you really just break it down, you think like, it can't be that hard to actually make a good pizza. And that's the thing. If you can make a good pizza out of those things, then you know that guy knows what he's doing, right? And it's the same when it comes to kind of the documentary Jiro Dreams of Sushi, which is still one of the go-to documentations, I think, when it comes to perfection, really mastering a skill. Instead of trying to be a master of everything or a jack of all trades, right? He's just like specializing on making the best sushi, and was never really satisfied with what he had in front of him. Right? And instead of like going out and then making, I don't know, cross kitchen of like, now I need to add some, I don't know, German sausages to my sushi as well. No, you're just like dealing with the things that you have in front of you and try to come up with the best mix there as well. And I think it's kind of also applying to bodybuilding. You have your physique, and now it's about kind of using the ingredients that you have in front of you. And that doesn't mean that you need to use all of those ingredients at once.
No, I think that's really well said. It's just, you just reminded me of the quote, because I saw it the other day, where I don't know if you've heard of this, the jack of all trades quote, where actually that's not where it stops.
No.
And it goes, a jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one. Apparently that's the full quote. I don't know whether that's fact or fiction, but I'm like, that directly contradicts how that first quote is used. It's so annoying. So when I saw it, I was just like, that's just
often,
annoying.
It says just like often, master.
Oftentimes, yes, that's a good precursor. Yeah. Important.
Because there are people who have specialized in their field and are just like, I love it to see when people are good at one thing. Like, where you are just like impressed by their skills. And we've talked about magicians last week. Seeing kind of the world championship of like magic tricks.
Oh, you watched it?
Yeah, it's blowing your mind, Steve. Honestly, this requires years of practice, of making the move smooth and all that kind of stuff, and creating that illusion. And it's amazing to see people like this. Same goes for musicians. Same goes for artists. People who have spent like decades in perfecting something. It's just something that I really, really find fascinating to watch.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. To bring it to an example we talked about before, I think about that now with tattoo artists. I never really I never really understood it before, but now when I see like I'd seen a lot of shit tattoos in the past, and you still do, but when I see an amazing one now, I'm just like, that isn't just paper they're drawing on here. That's fucking skin. That is like, and especially when it's like different tones of skin to get color on there, like I'm like, that's a whole science in its own right. Like mind blown. So yeah, I think we have a lot of respect for people who are just like complete masters. Like they've mastered whatever craft it is. I don't care if they're shit at everything else. If they like are the best at this one thing, that's pretty special. So
I envy those people, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't think someone like that as well, where it's like that people see me and they are just impressed by one skill or so, where it's just
the
like
moustache.
I don't where they are asking themselves like, how is this even possible?
Yeah.
And that's super cool to watch other people do. Like, honestly.
I think it's where that quote kicks in terms of oftentimes better than master of none is because I have a feeling not many of us could actually be a master, like a true master of one thing. If we only did one thing, you just might not ever have the skills. It's like being the fastest man in the world. Like, you could never master that. It's always going to be Usain Bolt because you don't have his genetics. So maybe that's where it's like, yeah, you probably don't. A lot of people might not be able to quite master one thing like that.
I mean, you must be also lucky, of course, finding something that you are naturally good at, that you also have the passion for, and that you're then ending up doing or have the ability to do. Because, I mean, we are now, what is it, 7 billion people on Earth, and not everyone is privileged enough to be in a position where they are capable then of doing the things that they are good at.
7.75 billion.
Oh, yeah.
I just had to Google it.
Yeah.
But you're very close, to be fair.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? Being lucky enough to be at the right time, at the right place, to then figure out what you're truly good at the same time be passionate about it as well, to then endure and perfect that skill for like the next decades. It's actually like a big privilege, to be honest.
Yeah. I think it was a book called Range that I read that talked about kind of the explosion of, I think it was like Microsoft and everything like that, and just how there was actually like a bunch of luck involved with that. Like, things just worked out perfectly in that situation. It isn't just like people think these things happen, I don't know, just for one reason, but there's so much that's involved with that outcome occurring. It's like Usain Bolt was only like born because this woman and this man got together and perfectly, and it all worked out. It wouldn't happen. So
that's something that I've already thought about so often. Like, what a fucking miracle it is that you're sitting here. There's a very great YouTube channel that is called Aperture for those people who want to check it out. And there he's talking about like, what are the odds that you are being born? And then he's just talking about it. It's very, very, very cool. So go check it out. It's a great YouTube channel if you want to find some kind of, it leaves you with a lot of kind of questions and thoughts, because it's kind of, he's talking about topics most of the time that is also kind of philosophical as well. And yeah, great channel.
Cool. On that note, leave it.
Absolutely. Then as always, guys, thank you very much for tuning in. Leave a like, subscribe, and also leave a comment in the comment section below, because when I'm checking out the stats, I can see that many people who are listening are still not subscribed. Not okay. It's not okay. Like My Chemical Romance said. I'm not okay.
Guys, subscribe now. You've been told. See you next time.
Cheers.
So I'm Steve Hall, founder of Revive Stronger and a coach of Revive Stronger.
My name is Pascal Steve. I'm the co-owner of Revive Stronger and also a coach, of course.
Revive Stronger has probably been going solidly for 3 years, roughly about 3 years.
Revive Stronger, to me, it is becoming kind of my child, my foster child. It's the gathering and getting together of like-minded people.
We've been expanding the coaching team, which is helping us help more people, but each coach can only help a certain number of people.
Right now, it's all over the place. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, but there isn't that community aspect behind that.
And so the next step for us is developing a membership site.
So basically, we want to create a family and a community that is then benefiting from another.
A really cool community for people within our little niche is going to be a website.
They will get early access to our podcast.
You can access us, ask us questions.
The community aspect, we have a forum there. You can ask questions, but also you can log your journey.
There's also going to be courses on there.
Courses, presentations on different topics. Discount of past seminar footage. We will log our journey as well. We'll start vlogging.
We're going to have documentaries.
Our entire athletic journey. Furthermore, they get access to an exercise video library.
the exercises that we love for hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy. We're going to go through those in depth, telling you how to execute them.
We kept them concise and also mobile friendly so that you can watch them in between your sets.
I'm super excited to grow this community. The amount of value that we're going to be delivering is huge. And I'd love you to be part of it.
You will get so much out of that.
I'll see you inside.